In August of 1995, Gail Smart contacted the Bowling Spring Lakes Police Department because she hadn't heard from her son, Timothy Smart, in several days.
He would call her every Wednesday night, no matter what. Well, when she didn't get that call for a day or so, she really started worrying.
She tells the police that she had called Brian O'Daniels herself. He said he hasn't seen him in over a month when he left hitchhiking for South Carolina.
She told police, I feel like this boy's lying to me. I don't know if they got in an argument. She's like, I don't know. She goes, but something happened with my son.
Brian O'Daniels said that Timothy Smart had been staying with him. He was working with him on his roofing company. He said he came back one evening and Tim was gone.
He stated that Tim took all his belongings with him. He just disappeared. That was the last time anybody saw Timothy Smart.
Tim moved in like 3 houses down from me. I was about 14, he was 15. And from there, we were inseparable. Tim had a horse named Pritzel growing up, and he rode that horse everywhere. He was definitely a cowboy. He dressed the part and everything. He did the line dancing, went out to the country and western bars. You know, he was a fun guy.
The police had spoke to a circle of friends of O'Daniels, which was Jamie Bigford, Kyle Johnson, and O'Daniels' girlfriend at the time, who was Angie Miller. And all of them had the same story. They either knew very little about Tim or he left hitchhiking. Everybody has that gut instinct that the circle of friends were protecting each other, and it was almost rehearsed.
He was asked questions such as, do you know what happened to Timothy Smart? And did you have anything to do with his disappearance? He would deny everything, the results of which showed that Mr. Daniels was being deceptive. But being deceptive is not enough to get an arrest warrant.
They really had no physical evidence, so that case went very cold very quickly.
As time went on, it didn't look like he was going to be found. But Tim's mom, Gail, never gave up looking for him, ever.
She was relentless in her letter writing. Just to remind everybody, he's still missing. I'm not going away.
That's a mom's drive, is to have those answers. They are very emotional, heartfelt letters.
The caller said that Timothy Smart was buried off of CC Road in a swampy area just to the west of Boiling Spring Lakes. It's a huge breakthrough.
So they went to that area and they conducted an aerial search. They conducted a search with cadaver dogs. They spent most of the day looking, and then they didn't discover anything. It was disappointing.
At this point, it's going to be tough to move forward without a body. Until we have something to actually point to the fact that it is a homicide, We can't really classify it as such. So it's set as a missing person case.
"25-year-old Timothy Smart was last seen in Boiling Spring Lakes in July 1995. What happened and where he is now remains unsolved." Smart lived in the 200 block of South Shore Drive in Boiling Spring Lakes. This was the last place he was ever seen. If you have any information, please contact the Boiling Spring Lakes Police Department.
The caller stated a rough location of where they believed Timothy Smart to be buried. The location matched where the search was done in 2000. And also, this caller did in fact say that Timothy Smart was murdered and said that Brian O'Daniels was the one responsible for it. The anonymous caller gave the name Jamie Bigford as an individual that we should talk to. They said that Mr. Bigford was at the house when Brian O'Daniels came back after killing Timothy Smart.
And they said that Jamie Bigford had witnessed Brian Lee O'Daniels rinsing blood out the back of a pickup truck. And he told him that he killed Tim.
Jamie Bigford was mentioned in the original case file. We were able to confirm that Mr. O'Daniels and Mr. Bigford were friends back in 1995. So that's huge for us. We now have a murder case. There's definitely pressure in that this could be our last shot at solving this case. We could start to talk to this original circle of friends again, and after this first interview, things could shut down immediately for us. We just routinely we'll go through on cold cases and take another look at them, and so we started to look back into a missing person case from '95, a guy named Timothy Smart. Do you know Mr. Smart, or did you know him?
Yeah, I mean, barely, but yeah, I knew who he was anyway.
Okay, just tell me how you knew him.
Well, I went to school with Brian, and
Brian is?
Brian, the guy that he lived with.
Okay.
So if I stopped by and see Brian, I would see that guy, but...
At this point, obviously, there's probably some sort of foul play that took place. So it's no longer a missing person investigation, but a homicide investigation. That being said, is there any information you have for us that can help us out?
No. I mean,
How close are you to Brian?
I mean, we were good friends in school, but, you know, like I say, I still talk to him. We don't see each other all that often.
Right. If he were to have done something that you knew about, would you cover for him?
No, sir. No.
Is he a violent person in any way?
No. I would like to think no.
Jamie does have a very distinctive nervous laugh. We can just tell from the nervous body language, he's holding stuff back. So we did start to push him a little bit at the risk of him completely shutting down. Tell me about Brian cleaning out the back of his truck that night.
I don't remember cleaning out the back of his truck.
You don't remember that?
No, I don't.
Is there any reason we would have gotten a call saying otherwise?
I don't know. I can't imagine why. I I've never seen him cleaning out a truck. I mean, I know what you're trying to say, but I didn't see any of that. No, sir.
Right. So why would they put you there the night that Tim disappeared or was killed, and had a conversation with Brian about what had happened? Is this something that's been weighing on you for a while?
Well, you know,
We're on the edge of our seat, just waiting for him to get it out. We were hoping that after all these years had passed, that he would be ready to get it off of his chest.
no, it's just I don't know what to say. If I didn't see any of that. Nothing went on that I ever saw.
You look like you were about to tell me right there what happened, and you didn't do it.
I
feel like you're between a rock and a hard place because you want to do the right thing. You know what happened to Tim, but you also know that your friend Brian is responsible for it.
I don't know what happened. I mean,
but Brian told you what happened to him.
well, I mean, he may have said something like he might not be coming back or something like that. But he never said I killed Tim or anything like that.
So it's the first building block we need to start working with. And so we're just trying to figure out how much can we push without him completely closing up and continue to give us some information. Is it possible that Brian pulled you into this? Pulled you into cleaning anything up or helping him get rid of anything?
Cleaning the what?
Like as far as getting rid of Tim's body?
No.
Cleaning up evidence of where he was in the back of the truck?
No, I never did. No, sir. I have never done anything.
We knew that he was lying, but I felt like that's when we were approaching the point where he's just going to completely shut down. We'll circle back and do a secondary interview at a later time.
We're concerned that if there was a pact that they had back in '95 to not come forward with the truth, maybe after this first interview they contact each other and re-up this pact to remain silent.
Angie had moved out of state. Even though it was a phone conversation, you could feel the reluctance and anxiousness in her voice. Charismatic and psychotic is how she summed Brian up. She harbored a lot of guilt for not ever saying anything. And so it was a lot of reassuring her that she was not in trouble. That rapport is very difficult to do over the phone, but we somehow did. She said Tim made a pass, and it sounds like Brian was upset about that at the time and spoke to Tim about it. Angie tells me that Brian's acting a little unusual. He tells her to go gather Tim's belongings, that he's not going to be returning, and she says very soon after that, he's never seen again. So she decided to confront him about that. And his story was that Brian and Tim had gotten in kind of like an argument, and that Tim had gone to the truck to get a gun from the truck, and that Brian ended up taking the gun away from Tim and shooting him.
So that's huge for us. It's the first conversation we have on record of anybody saying, I talked to Brian O'Daniels and he told me that he killed Timothy Smart. Well, man, we appreciate you coming in. Obviously, this is an old case.
Yeah.
95, and we have reopened it since then to look back into it.
Yeah.
So we're.
And what made you reopen? Just a cold case?
Some new information that had come forward.
Good.
And so we're just going through one at a time, sitting down with people and
Got it.
seeing what we can put together. What kind of light can you shed on this for us?
Well, probably quite a bit.
Tim and I lived out in the country. There was a pond not too far from the houses. We went fishing there. We hiked the mountains around us. We rode the horses in the mountains around us. We just did a lot of things together. We used to talk all the time. That's what I miss. In general, I miss my friend.
So who is your suspect? Can I ask you that question?
I'd like to hear your side of the story first, if you don't mind.
Is it O'Daniels?
It is O'Daniels.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and I'll start from here. So, in the mid-90s, all of us were really, really tight back in those days. We went to college together. I practically lived with him, and Tim. So Brian said that Tim was messing with Angie, his girlfriend. So Brian took the guy out and shot him.
Okay.
And he killed him. And apparently, if you go down the CC road, before you get to the big power lines, there's a little dirt road that takes off to the right. And then you go down that dirt road and there's a little curve, and you can take a left and there's a little pond. Well, Brian had buried him. Apparently, he had went back and dug him back up. And where he put him the second time, nobody knows.
Okay.
Brian came back from doing what he did with Tim and pulled up in his yard, and there was blood all in the back of the truck. And he cleaned the back of the truck out.
Okay. Who saw him cleaning up the truck? Did anybody see him cleaning it up?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if anyone. I'm not sure.
How do you know that it had blood in it and that he was cleaning it up?
Just him talking about it.
Were you there when he?
No,
cleaned it up?
absolutely not. I was not.
Okay.
Absolutely, but there was somebody else there.
Again, we're talking with everybody whose name we originally have. I'm pretty sure we already have this person's name, who you're thinking of.
Yeah. So, Jamie Bickford.
Okay, that's the name.
Okay.
It's great just hearing that from him. It confirms our suspicions that Jamie had information, and now we needed to bring Jamie Bickford in and give us a second interview and be completely truthful. What's your schedule like this afternoon if we wanted to ride over there to see where that location was?
If you want to go take a ride and look at it, I'll take you.
Kyle offers to take us out to what he believed to be the burial site. We're not going to pass that opportunity up, so we load up in vehicles.
We went to a remote area on the west side of Boiling Spring Lakes that is very rural, roughly 150 to 200 feet into the woods off the main road, just swamp. There's nothing back there.
So it was tough getting back to the area that he believed Tim to be buried. So we put the drone up. We found what we believed to be that small body of water at the time, but just couldn't pinpoint that needle in the haystack. We pulled him aside and said, hey, look, now we need to know how you know this information. At this point, you're either a suspect or a witness. He then gives us the name Randy Pickard. He believed Randy to be someone who helped Brian bury Tim's body. You were Kevin Smith from last time?
Yes, sir.
We talked to Kyle this morning for a while, and we want to sit back down with you and just give you another chance to tell us what you know in the case.
All right.
And come out with everything this time, okay?
Yes, sir. I understand. It's just, I was just scared, really, honestly scared.
I know. When I brought up Kyle Johnson, his body language instantly starts changing. We know we're heading in the right direction.
And now I'm still scared, but I'm tired of it. You know?
Right. So tell me walk me through leading up to what happened and why it happened and everything thereafter.
We went to Brian's house, and I didn't see Tim, and Brian said, stay here and check on Angie. So I stayed there and just waited, hung out, and then them two came back, Randy and Brian, and I could tell when they came back, I thought something had gone on. They were just weird acting, and you know, I just knew something was going on. And you'd asked me earlier about cleaning. I know I guess they were cleaning the truck. I know they were in the backyard doing something. I mean, and I think I drove back to Randy's house that night, and you know, I guess he said, look man, something bad's happened. I guess maybe Randy told, it's just, I know. I swear, I do not remember that. I do not remember that. I'm not.
Okay. Tell me about that conversation with Randy. Tell me exactly what he said. What do you remember?
I think he said that I just knew they were on the CC road. He said they dug a hole and put him in it. And that Brian had to kill him.
So this is great information. Now we're starting to get more witnesses pointing the finger at Brian O'Daniels. Now that we've got Jamie and Angie and Kyle on board, we needed to talk to Randy Pickard. When we sat Randy down, initially he wouldn't even let me turn on a recorder to record the interview. I had to assure him that He was not the target of our investigation. At the same time, we couldn't make him any promises that he was going to skate out scot-free. That was enough assurance that he needed to finally come off about what his involvement was and what he knew. So like I said, just like you just told us, just walk us through again. You said you were at the party, you were at the house party, you were asleep, and then Brian came and got you.
Yes, sir.
Just walk me through that again.
Then we jumped in the truck, went down CC Road, turned down the little path, and there was a car, fresh dirt, and he piled the dirt up behind the straw, changed the car. We tried to drag the car over what was there, and the car really didn't move. It just kind of went sideways. We threw pine straw everywhere and went down out the road.
And you said that the car that Brian attempted to pull over a hole that was dug, you said it had some round fenders. It was like maybe a 30s or 40s or
Yeah, it was
50s car.
Yeah, it was whatever that type of round, big headlight, round fender.
Okay. So you saw some disturbed ground,
Yes,
basically what appeared to be a hole that had been dug and then filled in.
yes, sir.
Okay. And you said there was a shovel in the back of the truck and a rake.
Yes,
You said it looked like there was blood in there.
yes.
And what did he lead you to believe it was?
A deer.
Okay. Even though it's not a completely truthful story, he's still corroborating these other witness statements that we have. The DA's office gave us the go-ahead to take out warrants to arrest Brian O'Daniels for the murder of Timothy Smart. We knew at this point it was still going to be a tough case to prosecute. We're moving forward on this case based on 4 witnesses without a body. You're nervous going into it. Here we are sitting him down 24 years after he killed somebody, and we're going to try to get him to confess to it. Hey, Brian. Well, with the state of your investigation, I don't know if you heard of us before or not. Kevin's with Boiling Spring Lake PD. I would guess you probably know why we're here.
Wow.
So did they explain the warrant to you?
No.
Okay. So why we're here now is because we have a warrant for your arrest for the murder of Timothy Smart.
You're kidding. An anonymous phone call.
We knew Brian O'Daniels. He was going to be caught off guard here 24 years later that he's now under arrest for a murder. So we wanted to start out easy. We also wanted to let him know we do have people on record saying that he's the one responsible. Do you remember I know this has been 24 years. Do you remember the day it was that he disappeared? Or that you last saw
I didn't know
him?
how many years it was. But one evening, his clothes, everything was gone.
Uh-huh.
He was supposed to be trying to go to South Carolina for a job interview.
Right.
I think it was the next morning or something like that.
Okay.
So, just assumed that he had gotten a ride.
Right.
Because that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get me to take him down there the next day, and I couldn't because I had to work.
Right.
So that was the last time that I ever heard from Tim.
Okay. Right. Well, would it shock you to hear that we've talked to a lot of people from your past who said that they know what happened to him?
Absolutely.
We've talked to Jamie Bigford, we talked to Kyle Johnson, we talked to Angie Miller. We went down to Florida and talked to Randy Pickard, where he's in prison now.
Well, then what happened?
Well, since we know about you going to get Randy and having him help you pull the car over where you buried Tim.
Dude, what? Man, that is crazy. That is crazy. Never happened.
Ron.
Never happened. Never happened. Never happened.
One of them said that Brian was, their best friend, and they said, it's probably been eating him up for the past 24 years too.
That's crazy.
So,
You guys are up the wrong tree.
we're not up the wrong tree, Brian.
You're up the wrong tree.
You know we're not up the wrong tree.
Yeah, you are up the wrong tree. Man, I didn't have anything to do with that. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know what happened to it.
He's arrogant, and it shows. And the fact that he's denying all of this is irrelevant because this is credible information.
I mean, I didn't know this guy that long. You can probably check these records better than me,
Brian, tell me what happened over off CC Road, or Antenna Farm Road.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Tell me about taking Tim over there.
I've never taken Tim down there.
Brian, look, I'm being as upfront and honest with you as I can.
Man, I have never taken Tim anywhere other than to work.
Look, the information I have, I'm not bluffing you. I'm not bluffing you.
Well, I don't know where you get it.
Well, I'm getting it from your circle of friends who was there that know what happened.
Man, I don't even think those people were at my house. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, let me ask you this. Why would Randy make a statement against himself, helping you get rid of Tim's body, knowing that he's going to be
I
charged?
have no idea.
Knowing that he's going to be charged with accessory after the
I
fact.
have no idea.
Brian, you're a smart guy, man.
Man, maybe Randy did it.
We circled a lot with him. We would hit him with something, he would deny it, and we'd go right back. We wanted to see if there was any conscience in there over what he'd done 20-some years ago. Every year, Tim's mom called our district office to find out if there were any new leads in her son's disappearance. And we went to go look her up last summer, and she passed away 2 years ago, not ever knowing what happened to her son.
It's a lot of years to go without knowing what happened to your only child. And wondering, she went to the grave, never knowing what happened to her child.
I've told you all I can tell you.
Brian, it's just not true.
It is true. That's all I know, and that's all I can tell you.
Is this the story you're going to stick to? It's not going to work
It's
for
not.
you.
It's the truth.
You know what happened, and I get it. You're scared. You thought this was gone after 24 years, but I'm telling you now, in this room right now is the time to tell us, okay?
Yeah. What I'm thinking is this is going to take me a couple of years to get out of this and prove that I'm innocent. And in the meantime, I know my life's going to be ruined.
I'm not going to give up on you, Brian. I think there's a heart in there somewhere.
Buddy, I've got a heart, but I've told you everything I know.
When you told Angie that, yes, I shot Tim, but he'd gone for the gun, listen, if that's what happened, this is the time to tell her right now.
That's crazy. It didn't happen.
Well, then what happened?
I have no idea.
Did you just kill him in cold blood?
No.
Brian, one of the two things happened.
Man,
Listen, look out.
I never, ever hurt that boy.
Either.
Ever. Don't know what happened to him. That's it. That's all I can tell you.
Either one, you're a cold-blooded killer and you just went out there and killed him because he hit on Angie and you're protective over her, and you couldn't trust him,
Right.
he was living in the house, or you guys got in an argument and maybe he went for a gun and that was your only option to try to fight and protect yourself.
We never even argued. We never bickered. Never. I didn't ever have a problem with him.
If you wanted to potentially help yourself out and show some good grace and help some people get some closure, you could take us to where Tim's at.
Oh my God. Man, I do not know where he's at. I don't know what happened to Tim, and I cannot help you. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, all your close friends know where he's at, know what happened to him.
Well, then they should go get him.
And
Ask them where he's at, because I don't know. If they know, then they should take you there, because I don't know. I'm going to tell you.
tell me why it happened.
I can't help you anymore. I've told you everything I know. It's not true.
Tell me when you're ready to go. I'll sit here as long as you want. If you
I
wanna
told
say-
you everything I could tell you.
You haven't.
Yeah, let's go then. Let's go.
Are you ready to go?
I've told you everything I can tell you. If you're taking me to jail, then let's go.
Okay, fine. I'll have him come check you out. There's no question at this point in anybody's mind as far as what happened. We had 4 people saying he was responsible, so we would have to go back and find this burial site so that we can put him behind bars for the murder of Timothy Smart.
I started doing some time-lapse satellite images through Google of the area. I was able to find an area that was exactly how they described. It had a small body of water. It had an access road. I went out there, I got a machete and kind of cut a path through the woods. Started scouting around a little bit, and I found a rusted out car chassis. Well, that's specific to the information Randy gave. And I felt like that this is where Tim's remains were.
So at that point, we're on a high again. This might be our pinpoint location for where Tim's buried. The dig was a big coordinated process. Brought in some heavy equipment and started leveling all the trees down. I think the third scoop in, I heard some agents start yelling, like, "Hold on, what's that?" And our forensic anthropologist walked over and hopped down in the hole and said, "That's a skull cap." So we started in the slow process of uncovering remains.
We recovered a wallet, and inside the wallet was the identification of Timothy Jason Smart. There's got to be some divine intervention here because everything just is falling in place.
Whatever's easiest for you to start out, if it's from the time you met Tim or if it's the evening of the events, whatever best helps you recollect everything leading up to.
Brian said he found a car in the woods. And he wanted to go try to get it. So we got the chain to a truck, turned the truck, headed down the road.
Right.
So I go put down the chain, hook up to the chain, and there's some boots and a leg and a very brown body.
Okay. What's your reaction at that point? What's the exchange between you and Brian?
Well, what in the hell have you got me into? I mean, this is here. I mean, now I'm in a bad situation. I'm in the middle of the woods where the guy's already killed somebody.
Right.
This got his feet sticking up out the dirt.
So they never got covered. We're pumped at this point because he's saying, yep, this is your guy. All his friends had finally come forward. Do I think he's guilty for this murder? Yes. Do I think he needs to be held responsible? Absolutely. It's a once-in-a-lifetime case. This was solved with a lot of old-fashioned police work and a lot of luck.
Even though Gail had passed away, she got justice for her son. I kept a copy of her letter on my desk throughout this investigation. That was my motivation to keep going.
She needed to hear we found him, and I think she would be completely at peace because she had her boy, and that's all that mattered.
I think the hardest part is he should have been my best man at my wedding, and he wasn't. You know, he should have been an uncle to my kids, and he's not here. Yeah, I don't know. I just miss him. I mean, I do. I really do.
For 54 years, he had no name, no family standing beside a grave, no birthday remembered, no photograph displayed on a mantelpiece. In the official files, he was reduced to a few cold measurements, a faded forensic sketch, and a case number buried beneath decades of dust. Detectives retired. Witnesses died. Entire generations came and went without ever knowing that somewhere, hidden inside filing cabinets and evidence lockers, a silent mystery was waiting for science to catch up. Then, more than half a century after his body was discovered, a phone call changed everything. The last unidentified victim finally had a name. But while that answer closed one of the oldest identification mysteries in the American Midwest, it reopened a far darker question. If this man was Arm's Henry Lottie who killed him, and why has that answer remained buried for more than 5 decades? The story begins long before anyone knew his name. It begins in an America that looked very different from today. Interstate highways were still expanding. Small industrial towns relied on factories, railroads, and logging camps. Communication traveled slowly. People disappeared more easily than anyone cared to admit. Missing person databases did not exist. Fingerprints could only solve cases if someone had already been arrested or formally documented. DNA profiling was still decades away from becoming reality. If someone drifted from town to town, cut ties with relatives, or simply vanished across state lines, there was a very real possibility that no one would ever connect the dots. It was within that world that an unidentified man entered history. His remains were discovered under circumstances that immediately raised troubling questions. Investigators could see signs suggesting that this was no ordinary death. Every detail of the scene hinted at violence, yet there were frustratingly few clues pointing toward a killer. The victim carried no identification, no wallet capable of revealing his identity, no driver's license, no paperwork, nothing that could tell investigators where he had come from or who might be waiting for him. The first officers at the scene worked methodically. They photographed every angle. They measured distances. They collected clothing. They searched nearby fields and roads. Every object became potential evidence. Every footprint was examined before weather erased it forever. Detectives hoped that somewhere within those silent details lay the key to identifying the dead man. But the scene refused to cooperate. Without a name, investigators faced an impossible obstacle almost immediately. Murder investigations begin with the victim. Friends, family, employment, habits, enemies, financial records, relationships. Every path normally starts with identity. Here, there was none. It was as though the victim had appeared from nowhere. Medical examiners carefully documented everything they could. Approximate age, estimated height, weight, hair color, eye color, dental condition, scars, old injuries, the clothing he wore, the shoes on his feet. Each observation was recorded with painstaking precision because those details represented the only voice the victim still possessed. Artists later transformed forensic measurements into facial reconstructions. Sketches attempted to restore features that decomposition had already begun to erase. Newspapers published images hoping someone would recognize the face. Police agencies circulated descriptions throughout neighboring states. Calls arrived, but every promising lead eventually collapsed. Families searched the sketches and quietly shook their heads. No. Not ours. Not him. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. The unidentified victim became one more cold case occupying shelves already crowded with forgotten tragedies. As America entered the 1980s, forensic science evolved dramatically. Investigators solved cases using better fingerprint systems. Dental comparisons became more organized. Computer databases slowly emerged. Yet the unidentified victim remained stubbornly anonymous. His case survived every technological revolution. Each time a new investigative tool appeared, detectives reopened the file with cautious optimism. Maybe fingerprints would match. They did not. Maybe dental records. Nothing. Maybe improved forensic anthropology. Still nothing. The evidence refused to surrender its secret. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the investigation, another mystery unfolded in complete silence. A family had lost contact with someone. Perhaps they assumed he wanted to disappear. Perhaps they believed he had started over somewhere else. Perhaps arguments, distance, or life's ordinary chaos gradually replaced concern with uncertainty. Without modern communication, countless missing adults simply faded from view. Families often lacked resources to search nationwide. Records stayed trapped inside county offices. Local police departments rarely shared information efficiently across multiple states. The system itself allowed people to disappear between the cracks. The unidentified victim became trapped inside those same cracks. His remains were buried without his true identity attached. Official paperwork preserved every scientific observation except the one detail that mattered most: his name. Cold case investigators would later describe unidentified homicide victims as existing inside a terrible limbo. They are neither completely forgotten nor truly remembered. Evidence continues to exist, but identity, the most basic human possession, remains missing. Every holiday passes without certainty. Every anniversary arrives unnoticed. Every birthday disappears into silence. The case stubbornly resisted explanation because investigators lacked something impossible to manufacture: context. Who had this man been? Where had he worked? Who last saw him alive? What dreams had he carried? Who would notice if he failed to come home? Without those answers, the investigation resembled assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle while missing the picture printed on the box. Over time, files yellowed. Ink faded. Original investigators retired. Some died. Their handwritten notes became historical artifacts studied by detectives young enough to have been born years after the murder occurred. Every new investigator inherited the same unanswered questions. Who is he? Who killed him? What happened? The passage of time complicated everything further. Witness memories deteriorated. Businesses closed. Roads changed. Buildings disappeared beneath new construction. Telephone numbers vanished. Entire neighborhoods transformed beyond recognition. Cases like this often collapse under the sheer weight of passing decades. Yet some investigators refuse to surrender. Cold case work demands extraordinary patience because progress rarely comes through dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, it advances one document at a time, one interview, one laboratory submission, one overlooked detail rediscovered inside forgotten evidence boxes. Then science took another extraordinary leap. DNA changed criminal investigations forever. Initially, its use focused on identifying offenders. Soon afterward, investigators realized the technology possessed another remarkable power. It could restore names to the unknown. Genetic genealogy eventually revolutionized cold case investigations across the United States. Unlike traditional DNA comparisons that required known samples already stored inside databases, forensic genealogy could identify relatives through family trees voluntarily submitted by individuals researching their ancestry. Cases once considered hopeless suddenly reopened. Unknown victims began recovering identities lost for generations. The impossible became achievable. Investigators revisited evidence preserved from decades-old homicide cases with renewed determination. Some biological samples, carefully stored for years despite changing technology and shrinking budgets, suddenly became invaluable. The unidentified victim's case entered this new era, carrying half a century of unanswered questions. Forensic specialists extracted DNA using methods unimaginable when the body had first been discovered. Every laboratory procedure required extraordinary care because aging evidence can easily degrade. Scientists worked patiently, producing genetic profiles capable of surviving comparisons far beyond traditional law enforcement databases. Then genealogists entered the investigation. Unlike television dramas, forensic genealogy rarely produces instant answers. It begins with distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, individuals who have never heard of the victim. Researchers painstakingly build enormous family trees stretching backward through generations. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, military records, census documents, immigration files, obituaries, property records. Each document narrows possibilities. Every branch eliminated brings investigators closer to one unknown individual whose disappearance somehow fits the historical timeline. The process often resembles solving history itself. Entire family networks emerge. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Names forgotten for decades suddenly return to life through archival paperwork preserved across countless government offices. Somewhere inside those expanding branches, investigators finally encountered a family connected to the unidentified victim. The evidence pointed toward Finnish-American ancestry. That discovery guided researchers into communities shaped by immigration during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, where countless families had settled across the upper Midwest in search of work in mines, forests, and factories. One name gradually rose above the others. Arms Henry Lottie. Investigators proceeded cautiously. Genealogical research creates investigative leads, not legal conclusions. Every connection requires independent confirmation through traditional forensic methods. Records were reviewed. Historical documents examined. Family histories compared. Living relatives were contacted with extraordinary sensitivity. Imagine receiving such a phone call. Someone introduces themselves as an investigator. They explain they are working on a homicide investigation older than many family members. Then comes the sentence, almost impossible to comprehend. "We believe we may have found your missing relative." Shock rarely captures the emotional complexity of that moment. Disbelief, hope, fear, confusion. Questions unanswered for generations suddenly become painfully real. Relatives who may have known only fragments of family stories found themselves confronting a mystery stretching back more than half a century. Some had likely heard vague references to an uncle, cousin, or brother who disappeared long ago. Others may never have known he existed at all. DNA comparisons ultimately confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. The unidentified homicide victim finally had his identity restored. His name was Arms Henry Lottie. After 54 years, official records no longer described him as an unknown man. They described him as a human being. The significance reached far beyond paperwork. Identification restored history. It restored family connections. It restored dignity. It restored the possibility, however distant, that justice might someday follow. Yet even as investigators announced the breakthrough, another haunting reality emerged. Knowing who the victim was did not reveal who had taken his life. The murder itself remained unsolved. The same questions first whispered beside that crime scene decades earlier still echoed through modern investigative offices. What happened during Arms Henry Lottie's final hours? Who crossed his path? Who benefited from his disappearance? And how had a man with a family, a history, and a name remained invisible to the justice system for more than half a century? The identification marked the end of one mystery. It also marked the true beginning of another. A name changes everything. For more than half a century, investigators have been chasing a ghost, reconstructing the final hours of a man who officially did not exist. The moment the laboratory confirmed the DNA match, the victim ceased to be John Doe. He became Arms Henry Lottie, a real person whose life stretched far beyond a forensic report. Yet the triumph carried an uncomfortable truth. Identity answered only the first question. The second, the one that had haunted detectives since the day his body was discovered, remained untouched. Someone had ended his life. That someone had never been identified, never been arrested, and perhaps had lived decades believing the crime would remain buried forever. Cold case investigators often describe victim identification as reopening a crime rather than closing it. Every confirmed name unlocks an entirely new investigation. Detectives no longer ask, "Who is this man?" They begin asking, "Who knew him? Where did he travel? What relationships shaped his life? Who might have wanted him dead?" The file expands overnight. Old evidence suddenly gains new meaning because it can finally be viewed through the lens of a real human story instead of anonymous statistics. Arms Henry Lottie's story was rooted in the upper Midwest, a region where generations of Finnish immigrants carved out lives through relentless labor. Beginning in the late 19th century, thousands left Finland seeking opportunities in the United States. They settled in communities scattered across Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and neighboring states, working in iron mines, lumber camps, factories, and railroads. Life demanded endurance. Winters were unforgiving. Employment could disappear overnight. Men frequently traveled long distances in search of seasonal work, sometimes living for months away from their families. It was an environment where disappearance could occur with terrifying simplicity. Long before smartphones, electronic banking, surveillance cameras, or social media, a man could leave one town for another carrying little more than a suitcase. Letters took days or weeks. Telephone calls were expensive. Employers rarely maintained comprehensive personnel records accessible across state lines. If someone drifted between temporary jobs, boarding houses, and isolated work camps, tracking their movements became extraordinarily difficult. Investigators studying Lottie's life understood this reality immediately. They were reconstructing events from an era when documentation was inconsistent and memory had already been eroded by more than 5 decades. Many people who might have known him personally were no longer alive. Those who remained possessed only fragments, stories passed through generations, fading recollections, family anecdotes repeated around kitchen tables until details blurred together. The challenge resembled assembling a portrait from scattered reflections. Every surviving record became precious. Birth documents, employment records, military registrations, if any existed, marriage licenses, census entries, property records, newspaper mentions. Each discovery revealed another small piece of Arms Henry Lottie's existence before it was violently interrupted. Investigators learned that he had not been created by forensic science. He had lived an ordinary life before becoming an extraordinary mystery. He had relatives. He had connections. He occupied a place within a family tree stretching across continents and generations. Somewhere, someone had known his laugh, recognized his handwriting, remembered his habits. That realization transformed the emotional weight of the investigation. For decades, the unidentified victim had existed almost as an abstract puzzle. Now detectives understood they were speaking about a son, a relative, a member of a community whose disappearance had quietly faded into uncertainty. One of the most haunting aspects of historical unidentified person cases is the absence of formal missing person reports. Modern audiences often assume every disappearance immediately triggers nationwide alerts, computerized databases, and coordinated investigations. During much of the 20th century, reality looked very different. Adults had the legal right to disappear voluntarily. Police frequently viewed missing adults as having simply chosen another path. Jurisdictional boundaries created enormous obstacles. Records remained local. Communication between agencies was inconsistent. Families sometimes hesitated to contact authorities, believing their loved one would eventually return. These circumstances created tragic blind spots. If Arms Henry Lottie left home seeking employment, relatives may initially have assumed he was traveling. Weeks without contact became months. Months became years. Hope gradually surrendered to uncertainty. Without clear evidence of violence, there was often little investigators could do. Meanwhile, somewhere else, an unidentified homicide victim waited for someone to recognize him. The two stories existed simultaneously, but never intersected. That disconnect represents one of the greatest failures of pre-digital criminal investigations, not because detectives lacked determination, but because the necessary tools simply did not exist. Today's investigators possess searchable national databases, automated fingerprint systems, digital DNA comparisons, facial reconstruction software, and forensic genealogy. Detectives working in the early 1970s relied largely upon telephones, mailed correspondence, paper files, and personal relationships with neighboring agencies. A mistake in one county could remain invisible to another for years. A missing person report filed in one state might never reach investigators handling unidentified remains elsewhere. The system itself created silence. As cold case detectives revisited Lottie's file, they also re-examined every piece of physical evidence preserved from the original investigation. Time had transformed ordinary objects into irreplaceable historical artifacts. Clothing once collected routinely now represented potential forensic treasure. Fibers could be reanalyzed. Biological traces invisible to earlier investigators might now yield microscopic evidence. Even packaging methods used decades earlier became subjects of careful review to ensure contamination had not occurred. Evidence rooms often resemble museums of unfinished justice. Boxes labeled decades ago remain unopened until advances in science justify another examination. Inside those boxes are photographs frozen in time, handwritten notes, evidence envelopes, laboratory reports prepared using techniques now considered outdated. Each document reflects investigators doing everything possible with the knowledge available at that moment. Modern detectives never judge those earlier efforts lightly. Instead, they build upon them. The original investigators preserved enough evidence for future generations to continue the search. That decision ultimately made identification possible. Still, identifying Arms Henry Lottie did not magically produce witnesses. If anything, time had become the investigation's greatest enemy. People relocate. Businesses disappear. Roads are rerouted. Buildings demolished. Landscapes transformed beyond recognition. Imagine attempting to investigate a conversation that occurred more than 50 years earlier between individuals whose names may never have appeared in official records. Every passing year reduces opportunities for direct evidence. Memories fade even when people desperately wish to remember. Psychologists have long documented how recollections evolve over time. Individuals rarely fabricate intentionally. Instead, genuine memories become blended with assumptions, newspaper accounts, conversations with relatives, and the natural distortions created by decades. A witness interviewed in 1972 remembers differently than the same witness questioned in 2026. That reality forces cold case investigators to approach historical testimony with extraordinary caution. Every statement must be corroborated. Every recollection compared against physical evidence. Every inconsistency examined without assuming dishonesty. Perhaps the greatest question surrounding Arms, Henry Lottie, involves his final journey. Where was he traveling? Who last saw him alive? Was he meeting someone intentionally? Did he accept a ride from a stranger? Was he searching for employment? Had he become involved in a personal dispute? Or was he simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? These questions remain painfully difficult because the passage of time erased countless opportunities to answer them. Investigators also examine the social landscape of the early 1970s. America was experiencing profound change. Economic uncertainty, shifting labor markets, increased mobility, and expanding highway systems meant more people than ever were traveling between communities. Hitchhiking remained common despite growing concerns about violent crime. Temporary employment drew workers across multiple states. Cash transactions dominated daily life, leaving few financial records capable of tracing movements. Without credit card histories, mobile phone data, GPS records, or surveillance footage, reconstructing travel depended almost entirely upon human observation. Someone had to remember seeing him. Someone had to recall a conversation. Someone had to recognize clothing. Someone had to connect a forgotten encounter with a murder investigation. Those fragile human memories became the investigation's most precious commodity. Cold case detectives often compare historical investigations to archaeology. Nothing appears dramatic at first. Progress occurs one careful layer at a time. A forgotten receipt. A family photograph. An address book. An employment application. An obituary mentioning relatives previously unknown. Each discovery reshapes understanding. Each eliminates possibilities. Each narrows uncertainty. The identification of Arms, Henry Lottie, also carried immense importance beyond this single investigation. Across the United States, hundreds of unidentified homicide victims remain without names. Every successful identification demonstrates what persistence and modern forensic science can accomplish. Cases once considered impossible increasingly become solvable, not because mysteries disappear, but because technology continues shrinking the distance between evidence and truth. For Lottie's family, however, the breakthrough represented something deeply personal rather than scientific. After decades of uncertainty, they no longer wondered whether their relative had simply vanished voluntarily. They knew. The answer was devastating. He had been the victim of homicide. That knowledge ended one form of suffering while beginning another. Grief without answers becomes its own kind of prison. Families imagine countless possibilities. Accident. Illness. A new life somewhere far away. Perhaps one day a letter will arrive. Perhaps someone will call. Perhaps they chose not to return. The confirmation of death destroys those imagined futures forever. Yet certainty, however painful, also restores reality. Arms Henry Lottie was no longer missing. He had been found. The responsibility now shifted entirely back to law enforcement. Investigators once again studied timelines stretching across decades. They reviewed original witness interviews. They searched for overlooked inconsistencies. They reconsidered individuals who may have drawn little attention during the initial inquiry. Every cold case contains moments investigators later wish they had explored differently, not because mistakes were obvious at the time, but because hindsight benefits from information unavailable during the original investigation. Could a witness dismissed decades earlier now seem credible? Could a casual acquaintance hold forgotten knowledge? Could preserved evidence reveal microscopic details impossible to detect using 1970s technology? These questions drove the renewed investigation. Somewhere inside thousands of pages, aging photographs, laboratory reports, and family histories, detectives hoped another breakthrough awaited. Because naming the victim was never intended to be the final chapter. It was the first real opportunity to pursue justice with clarity. And somewhere beyond the forensic files, beyond the archived newspaper clippings and faded investigative notes, one chilling possibility continued to linger. If the person responsible for Arms, Henry Lottie's death, had escaped justice for more than 50 years, they may never have imagined that modern science would eventually undo the anonymity they once depended upon. The victim had finally reclaimed his name. The next question was whether the killer's name still remained hidden, or whether it had been sitting quietly inside the investigation all along, overlooked by history but not beyond the reach of the truth. For more than 5 decades, the man at the center of this investigation existed only as an unanswered question. His remains had been discovered, his death had been documented, evidence had been collected and preserved. Yet the most basic truth about him, the name he had carried throughout his life, remained beyond the reach of investigators. That changed when modern forensic science finally accomplished what decades of traditional investigation could not. Arms Henry Lottie was no longer an unidentified victim. The confirmation of his identity represented a major breakthrough, not only for this case but for the broader effort to restore names to forgotten victims across the United States. For investigators who work with unidentified remains, the mission begins with a simple but profound principle: every person deserves to be known. A victim is never just evidence. A victim is a person with a history, a person with relationships, a person whose absence affected others, even when those connections were separated by time and distance. The identification process that revealed Lottie's name was made possible through advances in forensic genealogy and DNA technology. These methods have transformed cold case investigations by allowing researchers to connect unidentified remains with living relatives through genetic relationships. Unlike traditional DNA searches, which often depend on finding an exact match in law enforcement databases, forensic genealogy works differently. It follows biological connections across generations. A distant relative can provide the first thread. That thread can lead investigators through family records, historical documents, and genealogical research until a possible identity emerges. In cases that have remained unsolved for decades, this process can restore information that time nearly erased. The identification of Arms, Henry Lottie demonstrated the power of combining old evidence with new technology. Evidence collected many years earlier, when investigators had limited scientific resources, could later become the foundation for a breakthrough that earlier generations could never have imagined. This transformation reflects a dramatic change in modern criminal investigations. A case once limited by geography can now extend across generations. A forgotten file can be reopened. A victim without a name can finally be connected to a family history. But identification is only one part of the journey. When investigators restore a victim's identity, they often face a complicated emotional reality. The answer that families have waited for can bring relief, but it can also bring pain. For decades, relatives may have lived with uncertainty. They may have wondered whether their missing loved one had started a new life, moved somewhere unknown, or simply disappeared without explanation. The truth can be difficult. Finding a missing person through a homicide investigation means accepting a reality that families may have feared but never confirmed. The person they were waiting for did not return. The unanswered questions that lasted for decades finally have an answer. But the answer is not always the one anyone hoped for. For Arms Henry Lottie's relatives, the identification restored something that had been lost for generations: recognition. His name could finally be connected to his story. His life could be acknowledged beyond the limited description of an unidentified victim. This is one of the most important aspects of solving unidentified person cases. The goal is not only investigative progress, it is also restoring dignity. Every unidentified victim represents a missing piece of history. Behind every case file is a human life that existed before the investigation began. There was a childhood. There were experiences. There were people who knew that person. There were memories that continued somewhere, even when investigators no longer knew the victim's identity. The identification of Lottie also highlights the challenges faced by investigators working on historical cases. Time remains one of the greatest obstacles in any cold case investigation. Witnesses may no longer be available. Records may have been lost. Communities may have changed. Places connected to the investigation may no longer look the same. The world surrounding a crime can disappear while the evidence remains. That is why preserving evidence is so important. A photograph taken decades ago, a record stored in an archive, or a biological sample preserved under careful conditions can become invaluable when new technology emerges. Many cold cases are not solved because investigators suddenly discover a completely new piece of evidence. Instead, they are solved because existing evidence gains new meaning. Science changes. Methods improve. Questions are asked again. Old files receive new attention. The identification of arms, Henry Lottie, belongs to that larger story, the ongoing effort to use modern technology to answer questions that previous generations could not solve. Yet even after his identity was confirmed, the circumstances surrounding his death remained unresolved. The identification answered who the victim was, but it did not provide all the answers surrounding the crime. That distinction is critical. A name can restore a person's identity, but justice requires more. Justice requires understanding what happened. It requires determining the circumstances that led to a person's death. It requires uncovering facts supported by evidence. For investigators, the work does not end when an unidentified victim receives a name. In many cases, that moment marks a new phase of the investigation. The question changes. Instead of asking, "Who is this person?" investigators can finally ask, "What happened to this person?" The difference is enormous. Before identification, the victim's life is hidden behind a wall of uncertainty. After identification, investigators can search for connections that were impossible to see before. Family history, personal records, historical information, possible timelines. Every verified detail becomes another piece of a much larger puzzle. The story of arms Henry Lottie is therefore not only about a decades-old mystery. It is also about the evolution of investigative science and the determination to remember those who were once forgotten. For 54 years, his name was missing from the official record. Now it is there. A name recovered from silence. A life restored to history. A family connection rebuilt after generations of uncertainty. But the case continues to carry the weight of an unanswered question that remains at the center of every unsolved homicide. Who was responsible? Time may have passed. Evidence may have aged. The world may have changed. But the search for truth does not disappear simply because decades have gone by. For arms Henry Lottie, the first mystery has been solved. The final one remains. For decades, the file existed as a reminder of one of the most difficult challenges in criminal investigations, the search for a person who had disappeared not only from the world, but from history itself. Before modern technology restored his identity, the victim was known only through fragments. A set of remains. A collection of forensic observations. A case number. A mystery. But behind every unidentified victim is a story that began long before the investigation. A person does not become a cold case when they are discovered. The cold case begins because the world failed to connect that person's final chapter with the life they lived before. The identification of arms Henry Lottie changed that. It transformed an anonymous investigation into a human story. For investigators, this transformation represented one of the most meaningful moments possible in cold case work. The unknown victim finally had a place in history. Researchers could move beyond the limitations of physical evidence and begin examining the life behind the name. Who was Arms Henry Lottie? Where did he come from? What experiences shaped him? What circumstances led him to become the subject of a decades-long investigation? These questions became possible only after identity was restored. That is the power of identification. A name creates connections. A name creates records. A name creates a past. Without a name, a victim remains isolated from the world they once belonged to. With a name, investigators can begin searching through the countless documents and memories that exist around a human life. The process also reveals a difficult reality about missing person cases from previous generations. Many disappearances were never connected. In the decades before advanced digital systems, law enforcement agencies often operated within limited geographic boundaries. A person could vanish in one location while information about their disappearance remained confined to another. Communication between departments was slower. Records were often stored on paper. National databases capable of instantly comparing missing persons and unidentified remains did not exist in the way they do today. This meant that thousands of individuals across the country remained separated from their families and from the investigations that might have identified them. The passage of time created another barrier. Decades can erase evidence in ways that have nothing to do with physical objects. Memories fade. Communities change. People move away. Buildings disappear. Entire neighborhoods transform. A person who was once familiar to a community can eventually become a forgotten name in an old record. For cold case investigators, time is both an enemy and a reason to continue. Every year that passes creates additional challenges, but it also creates opportunities as technology develops. Evidence that once seemed limited can become valuable again. Scientific methods that did not exist during an original investigation can reveal information hidden for generations. This is why old cases are never truly closed for investigators who continue searching for answers. A cold case is not simply an old case. It is an unfinished story. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie became part of a larger movement within forensic science, the effort to return names to unidentified victims. Across the United States, investigators, forensic specialists, and genealogists have worked together to solve cases that once appeared impossible. These investigations require patience and cooperation between many different fields. Scientists analyze DNA. Genealogists study family connections. Researchers examine historical documents. Law enforcement officers review original evidence. No single person solves these cases alone. Instead, breakthroughs come through collaboration. A small piece of information from one source can become the key that unlocks another. A distant genetic connection. A forgotten record. A historical document. A family story preserved over generations. Each piece matters. The identification of Lottie also demonstrates how much investigative science has changed. In earlier decades, investigators were often limited by what they could physically observe. They relied heavily on fingerprints, photographs, witness statements, dental comparisons, and traditional records. Today, investigators have access to tools that previous generations could only imagine. DNA can reveal biological relationships. Advanced databases can connect information across locations. Digital archives can preserve records that might otherwise disappear. Technology does not replace traditional investigation. Instead, it expands what investigators can discover. The human element remains essential. Behind every database entry is a person. Behind every genetic connection is a family. Behind every cold case is a victim whose story deserves to be told accurately and respectfully. That principle is especially important in unidentified homicide cases because the victim cannot speak for themselves. They cannot explain where they were. They cannot describe what happened. They cannot identify the person responsible. Their voice exists only through evidence. And evidence requires patience. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie allowed investigators to hear that voice more clearly. But unanswered questions remained. A victim's identity provides a starting point, not an ending. The investigation must still confront the uncertainty surrounding the circumstances of his death. The passage of decades means investigators must carefully separate facts from assumptions. What is known? What can be proven? What remains unknown? These questions guide every responsible cold case investigation. Unlike fictional mysteries, real investigations rarely unfold through one dramatic discovery. More often, they progress slowly through careful examination and verification. A single fact may not solve a case, but multiple confirmed facts can gradually build a clearer picture. This approach protects the integrity of the investigation and ensures that conclusions are based on evidence rather than speculation. For families connected to unidentified victims, this process can be emotionally complicated. Many families spend years wondering. They search. They wait. They remember. Some hold on to hope even when decades pass. Others eventually accept that answers may never come. When identification finally occurs, it can bring a mixture of emotions that are impossible to describe with a single word. Relief. Sadness. Closure. Pain. After decades of uncertainty, a family can finally know what happened to their loved one. But knowing does not erase the loss. It simply replaces uncertainty with truth. And truth, even when painful, carries a different kind of peace. The name Arms Henry Lottie now represents more than an investigative breakthrough. It represents the importance of remembering those who disappeared. It represents the idea that time should not determine whether someone deserves to be found. And it represents the continuing evolution of forensic science, where cases once considered lost can still return to the attention of investigators. 54 years passed before his identity was restored. A lifetime for some. An entire generation for others. But the search continued, because behind every forgotten file is a person who mattered. Behind every unidentified victim is a story waiting to be recovered. And behind every cold case is the possibility that one day, even after decades of silence, the truth may finally begin to emerge. The passage of time is one of the most powerful forces in any cold case investigation. It can destroy evidence, separate witnesses from memories, and transform once familiar places into landscapes that no longer resemble the world where the crime occurred. But time can also preserve something investigators never stop searching for: the possibility that one day, the right technology, the right information, and the right moment will finally bring a forgotten story back into the light. The identification of Arms, Henry Lottie represented that moment. After 54 years of uncertainty, a man who had existed only as an unidentified victim was finally connected to a real identity. The achievement was not simply a scientific success. It was a reminder that every unresolved case represents a person whose life continued to matter long after the investigation went silent. But restoring a name does not erase the mystery surrounding a death. It only changes the nature of the mystery. Before identification, investigators were searching for the person behind the evidence. After identification, they were searching for the truth behind the tragedy. The investigation moved from a question of identity to a question of history. What was known about Arms, Henry Lottie's life? What records survived? What connections could be traced? What information had been lost during the decades between his death and his identification? These questions represent the difficult reality of reopening a case separated from the present by more than half a century. Cold case investigators understand that every piece of information must be approached carefully. A document from decades ago may provide an important clue, but it must be placed within its historical context. A memory from a witness may offer valuable insight, but it must be examined with an understanding of how human recollection changes over time. The goal is not simply to find answers. The goal is to find accurate answers. That distinction is what separates responsible investigation from speculation. The story of Arms, Henry Lottie, also highlights a broader issue that affected countless families throughout the 20th century: the difficulty of locating missing adults. Today, when a person disappears, information can travel instantly. Digital records, electronic communication, and nationwide databases create connections that were impossible generations earlier. But decades ago, disappearance was often surrounded by silence. A person could move across state lines and leave behind very little documentation. Employment could be temporary. Housing could change frequently. Personal records could remain scattered between counties and states. For investigators, these limitations created enormous challenges. A missing person in one community might never be connected to unidentified remains discovered somewhere else. A family searching for answers might never know that another agency held the information they needed. The result was a painful separation between two realities: the missing person and the unidentified victim. Both existed, but they existed apart. Modern forensic science has become the bridge between them. The identification of Lottie demonstrates how advances in DNA technology and genealogy have changed the landscape of investigations involving unidentified remains. Evidence collected decades earlier can now reveal relationships that were invisible to previous generations. This process requires extraordinary patience. A DNA profile does not simply produce a name instantly. Behind every identification is extensive research. Scientists must carefully analyze genetic information. Genealogists must build family connections. Historical researchers must verify records. Investigators must confirm conclusions through additional evidence. Each step matters because the responsibility is enormous. When a name is restored after decades, that name belongs to a real person and a real family. Accuracy is essential. The impact of such an identification extends far beyond law enforcement. For communities, unidentified cases often remain as unresolved wounds. A victim without a name represents a question that never disappeared. Residents may remember the case from old newspaper articles. Investigators may carry the file throughout their careers. Families may continue searching without knowing whether they will ever receive answers. When an identification finally occurs, it creates a moment of recognition. The person who had been reduced to a case number is once again seen as a human being. This is why investigators often describe these cases as giving someone back their identity. Because identity is more than information. It is connection. A name connects a person to a family. A family connects a person to history. History connects a person to the world. For Arms Henry Lottie, that connection had been interrupted for decades. The identification restored part of what had been lost. However, the unanswered circumstances surrounding his death remained a reminder of the difficult reality of homicide investigations. Even with modern technology, some questions remain challenging because the evidence available today may be incomplete compared with what investigators would have had at the beginning. The passage of time creates uncertainty. People who may have known important information may no longer be available. Physical locations may have changed. Documents may have disappeared. The original investigation may have been conducted under limitations that no longer exist today but cannot be reversed. Cold case investigators must work within those realities. They examine what remains. They reconsider what was overlooked. They apply new methods to old evidence. And they continue searching. One of the most important lessons from decades-old investigations is that persistence matters. Many cases that eventually receive answers were not solved because someone discovered a dramatic new clue. They were solved because investigators refused to accept that the passage of time meant the truth was unreachable. The file remained. The evidence remained. The questions remained. And eventually, the opportunity to answer those questions arrived. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie belongs to this larger history of perseverance. It shows how modern science can accomplish what earlier generations could not. It shows how forgotten victims can return to public awareness. It shows how technology, combined with careful investigation, can restore information lost for decades. But it also reminds us that every solved identity represents only one part of a much larger story. A victim's name is the beginning of understanding. It opens the door to questions about their life, their experiences, and the circumstances that brought them to their final moments. Every answer creates new questions. Every discovery reveals another layer. And every cold case carries the same fundamental hope. That somewhere within the remaining evidence, within the surviving records, within the memories preserved by families and communities, the truth may still exist. For more than 50 years, Arms Henry Lottie's name was hidden from the world. Now it has been restored. But the investigation surrounding his death remains a reminder that justice is not measured only by how quickly answers are found. Sometimes, justice is measured by whether the search continues. Because even after decades pass, even after memories fade and records grow old, every victim still deserves to be remembered. Every story still deserves to be told. And every unanswered question still deserves the chance to be answered. In the world of cold case investigations, time creates a strange contradiction. The longer a case remains unsolved, the more difficult it becomes to uncover the truth. Yet the same passage of time can also create opportunities that did not exist when the investigation first began. For Arms Henry Lottie, more than 5 decades passed before one of the most important questions was answered. Who was he? That question had followed the case from the beginning. It was the barrier standing between investigators and the possibility of understanding the victim's life. Without identity, every investigation reaches a limit. There is no family history to examine, no personal records to review, no confirmed timeline to rebuild. There is only uncertainty. The identification of Lottie changed that. But it also revealed the complicated reality behind many cold cases. Finding a name is only one step in the search for justice. A person's identity provides a doorway into the past. Behind that doorway are years of experiences, relationships, decisions, and circumstances that shaped the individual before they became part of an investigation file. For investigators, this means returning to the beginning. Not the beginning of the crime. The beginning of the person. The search becomes a reconstruction of a life. Every available record becomes a possible connection. Historical documents become more than paperwork. They become evidence of existence. A date, an address, a family connection, or a recorded event can transform an unidentified figure into someone who lived within a community. This process is especially important in cases involving victims who remained unidentified for decades because time often separates people from their own history. A document that once seemed ordinary can become significant years later. A forgotten record can answer a question that investigators did not even know to ask. A family connection discovered through genealogy can reopen an entire investigation. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie was made possible because modern science allowed investigators to look beyond the limitations of the original era. The tools available today are dramatically different from those available when the case first emerged. In earlier decades, investigators depended primarily on traditional methods: physical descriptions, witness interviews, fingerprints when available, dental records, public appeals, newspaper coverage. These methods could solve many cases, but they depended heavily on one crucial factor. Someone had to recognize the victim. Without that recognition, the investigation could remain frozen. Today, forensic science has changed that reality. DNA analysis has created new possibilities for cases that once appeared impossible. A victim no longer needs to be recognized by appearance alone. Genetic information can reveal connections invisible to traditional investigation methods. This represents a fundamental shift. The question is no longer only, who knows this person? The question can also become, who is biologically connected to this person? That difference has transformed countless investigations. However, science alone does not solve cold cases. Behind every technological breakthrough is human effort. Researchers spend countless hours examining records. Investigators compare information. Families provide details that may have been forgotten for generations. Every discovery depends on patience. The identification of Lottie also demonstrates the importance of preserving evidence. When an investigation remains unsolved for decades, the survival of original materials can determine whether future breakthroughs are possible. A carefully stored piece of evidence may become valuable years later. A photograph preserved in an archive may reveal information unavailable to earlier investigators. A record maintained by a government office may provide a missing connection. Cold cases are often described as investigations frozen in time. But in reality, they continue evolving. The evidence remains. The technology changes. The questions become clearer. And sometimes, after decades of silence, the answers begin to emerge. The story of Arms, Henry Lottie, also reflects the emotional importance of identification for families. For relatives searching for a missing loved one, uncertainty can become a permanent part of life. There is no official goodbye, no confirmed ending, no place to direct grief. Instead, families live with questions. What happened? Where did they go? Are they still alive somewhere? Will anyone ever know? These questions can continue across generations. Children grow older while waiting for answers about parents they barely remember. Relatives pass away without learning the truth they spent years seeking. Family stories become incomplete. A missing person becomes an absence that shapes everyone connected to them. When identification finally occurs, that absence changes. The pain does not disappear, but uncertainty does. A family can finally understand what happened. They can finally attach a name to the history they carried. They can finally recognize that their loved one was not forgotten. For investigators, these moments provide a powerful reminder of why cold case work matters. The purpose is not only solving crimes. It is restoring dignity. It is acknowledging that every victim had a life before the investigation began. The public often sees cold cases through headlines and dramatic discoveries, but behind every breakthrough are years of quiet work. Files are reviewed, records are searched, scientific methods are tested. Researchers continue even when immediate results seem unlikely. The identification of Arms, Henry Lottie, represents the result of that persistence. A case that survived changing generations. A mystery that remained unanswered through decades of technological transformation. A victim who waited more than 50 years to have his identity returned. But the investigation still carries the weight of an unresolved question. A name has been recovered. A history has been restored. But the circumstances surrounding his death remain part of the unfinished search for truth. This is the reality of many cold cases. One answer can reveal another mystery. One discovery can open another investigation. The end of one chapter becomes the beginning of the next. For Arms, Henry Lottie, the first chapter was about identity. The second chapter is about understanding. Understanding the life he lived. Understanding the events that surrounded his death. Understanding the unanswered questions that remain. Every cold case begins with silence. But silence does not mean there is no story. Sometimes the story is simply waiting for the right moment, the right evidence, and the determination to uncover it. More than 50 years after investigators first encountered an unknown victim, science finally restored the most important piece of information. His name. Arms Henry Lottie. A name that had been separated from the world for decades. A name that now stands as a reminder that even the oldest mysteries can still move forward. Because time can delay answers, but it does not erase the search for truth. For many cold case investigations, the greatest obstacle is not the lack of evidence. It is the distance between the present and the moment when the crime occurred. Decades create a silence that investigators must learn how to navigate. The people who once walked through the original investigation may no longer be available. The communities that surrounded the case may have changed completely. The technology used to collect evidence may seem primitive compared with modern standards. And yet, somewhere within the surviving records, the truth may still remain. The identification of arms, Henry Lottie, after 54 years, demonstrated one of the most important lessons in modern forensic investigation. Unanswered does not always mean unsolvable. For years, the case represented the challenge faced by countless unidentified victims. The physical evidence existed, but the person behind it remained unknown. Without identity, investigators were limited in their ability to understand the circumstances surrounding the death. A victim without a name creates a wall around the investigation. A name removes that wall. Once investigators confirmed that the unidentified victim was Arms Henry Lottie, they gained something that had been missing for decades, a connection to a real human history. That connection changed the meaning of the entire case. The investigation was no longer centered on an unknown individual. It was centered on a person who had lived, worked, formed relationships, and left behind a family history. The science had solved one mystery. Now investigators faced the deeper challenge of understanding what happened. Cold case investigations often require a different approach from active investigations. The urgency of the first days and weeks has long disappeared. Instead, investigators must work through layers of history. They examine old reports. They analyze preserved evidence. They compare information collected decades apart. They search for details that may have seemed insignificant at the time but could carry new meaning today. This process requires patience because the answers are rarely found in one dramatic moment. More often, they appear through accumulation. One piece of information, then another, until a clearer picture begins to form. The identification of Lottie also represents the growing role of forensic genealogy in modern investigations. This scientific approach has become one of the most significant developments in solving unidentified person cases. For decades, investigators relied primarily on available records and traditional identification methods. If a victim's fingerprints were not in a database, if dental records could not be matched, and if no family member recognized the person, the investigation could reach a dead end. Genetic genealogy changed that reality. By analyzing DNA relationships and connecting them with genealogical research, investigators can sometimes identify individuals who have remained unknown for generations. The process is complex and requires careful verification. A genetic connection alone does not tell the entire story. Researchers must examine historical records. They must confirm family relationships. They must ensure that conclusions are supported by additional evidence. The goal is not simply finding a possible answer. The goal is finding the correct answer. That responsibility becomes even more important when dealing with victims of homicide. A false identification can create new pain for families and damage the integrity of an investigation. Accuracy is essential. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie illustrates why these cases matter beyond statistics and headlines. Every unidentified victim represents a person whose story was interrupted. The absence of a name can create a second disappearance. The person disappears physically. Then, over time, they risk disappearing historically. Their photographs are forgotten. Their memories fade. Their connection to future generations weakens. Identification reverses that process. It restores the person to history. It gives families the opportunity to reconnect with a part of their past. It allows investigators and communities to recognize that the victim was more than the circumstances of their death. This is one of the most powerful aspects of modern forensic work. Science is not only about solving crimes. It is also about restoring humanity. For many families, the moment they learn the truth after decades of uncertainty is overwhelming. The discovery may bring grief, but it can also bring relief. The unknown becomes known. The unanswered question finally receives an answer. A missing person is no longer missing. A forgotten name returns. But even after identification, investigators must confront the limitations created by time. A homicide investigation depends heavily on information, witnesses, evidence, records. Connections. Over 50 years, all of these can become more difficult to obtain. Witnesses age. Memories change. Documents disappear. Locations transform. The world surrounding the crime may no longer exist in the same form. Investigators working historical cases must understand this reality while continuing to search for facts. They cannot recreate the past, but they can examine what remains. They can study evidence through modern methods. They can revisit information with new perspectives. They can ask questions that earlier investigators may not have had the ability to answer. This is why old cases are frequently reopened. Not because previous investigators failed, but because the tools available today are different. A case that was impossible decades ago may become possible now. The identification of arms, Henry Lottie, stands as an example of that transformation. The original investigators worked with the resources available to them. They documented what they could. They preserved evidence. They created a record that allowed future investigators to continue the search. Their work became the foundation for a breakthrough many years later. Cold case investigations are often built across generations. One investigator begins the search. Another continues it. A third uses new technology to uncover what earlier generations could not. The pursuit of truth becomes a shared responsibility across time. For Lottie's case, the recovery of identity was a major milestone, but it also served as a reminder that every answer creates new responsibilities. A victim has been identified. Now the story behind that victim must be respected. The remaining questions must be approached carefully. The facts must be separated from assumptions. The investigation must continue based on evidence. This careful approach is especially important because unresolved cases often attract speculation. When information is limited, people naturally attempt to fill the gaps. But real investigations cannot be built on imagination. They must be built on proof. Every conclusion must have support. Every claim must have evidence. Every detail must be examined through the standards of responsible investigation. The story of arms Henry Lottie is therefore not simply a story about a mystery from the past. It is a story about perseverance, about science, about the importance of remembering those who were once unidentified. It is a story about a system that continues to evolve, searching for answers that earlier generations could not find. After 54 years, a name was finally returned. A family connection was restored. A forgotten victim was remembered. But the search for complete understanding continues. Because behind every cold case is a simple truth. The passage of time may change an investigation. It may make the path more difficult. It may create obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. But it does not erase the value of the truth. And for arms Henry Lottie, that truth began with something every person deserves from the moment they enter this world. A name. A name is often the first step toward justice, but it is never the final destination. For decades, the unidentified victim connected to this case existed in a state of uncertainty. Investigators knew that a person had lost their life, but they did not know the story behind that person. Without an identity, the investigation remained limited by the absence of the most important piece of information. Who was he? The identification of arms, Henry Lottie, changed that reality. The discovery did not erase the unanswered questions surrounding the case, but it restored something that had been missing for more than half a century: recognition. A person who had once been known only through forensic descriptions could finally be connected to a real name and a real history. This moment represents the purpose behind modern efforts to identify unknown victims. The goal is not simply to update a record or complete a database entry. The goal is to restore a human connection that was lost. Every unidentified victim represents a story interrupted. Behind every file is a person who once had daily routines, personal experiences, and relationships that existed long before investigators became involved. When identity is missing, those parts of a person's life become separated from the investigation. Modern forensic science works to rebuild that connection. The identification of Lottie reflects the remarkable changes that have occurred in criminal investigations over the last several decades. Technology that did not exist when the original investigation began has created new possibilities for cases once considered beyond resolution. DNA analysis, advanced databases, and genealogical research have transformed how investigators approach unidentified remains. Instead of depending only on recognition or traditional records, investigators can now search for biological connections that may lead back to a person's family. But behind every technological achievement is a process built on careful research. There are no shortcuts. A genetic result must be studied. Connections must be verified. Historical records must be examined. Investigators must ensure that the final identification is supported by reliable evidence. The importance of this careful process cannot be overstated. An identification changes the lives of families connected to the victim. It provides answers that may have been missing for generations. It can confirm a loss that was never fully understood. For families of missing people, uncertainty can become a lifelong burden. Without confirmation, there is always a question, a possibility, a hope that remains open. Some families continue searching for decades, wondering whether they will ever know what happened. The absence of information creates a unique form of grief because there is no clear ending. The identification of a long-missing person changes that reality. The truth may be painful, but it provides certainty. It allows families to remember their loved one with a complete story rather than an unanswered question. This is why unidentified person investigations carry such importance. They are not only about solving mysteries, they are about acknowledging lives that were nearly forgotten. The story of Arms, Henry Lottie, also demonstrates how investigations can continue across generations. The investigators who first worked on the case could not have imagined the tools available today. They worked within the limits of their time. They collected information, preserved evidence, and documented what they could. Their efforts created the foundation that allowed future investigators to continue. Cold cases are often solved through this connection between past and present. One generation gathers the evidence. Another generation discovers new ways to interpret it. The work continues until the missing piece finally appears. However, the identification of a victim also creates new challenges. A person's identity provides new information, but it does not automatically reveal every detail surrounding a death. Investigators must still carefully examine what evidence exists and what conclusions can responsibly be drawn. The passage of time means that some answers may remain difficult to obtain. People who might have provided information may no longer be available. Records that once existed may have been lost. Locations connected to the investigation may have changed completely. The environment surrounding the original investigation may no longer be recognizable. This is the reality of historical cases. Investigators cannot change the past. They can only work with what remains. They examine surviving evidence. They review previous findings. They apply modern methods. They search for information that may have been invisible decades earlier. The process requires patience and discipline. Cold case investigations are not built on assumptions. They are built on facts. Every detail must be evaluated. Every piece of evidence must be considered carefully. Every possible connection must be examined through verification. This approach protects not only the investigation, but also the memory of the victim. Because the victim deserves more than an answer. The victim deserves the truth. The identification of Arms, Henry Lottie, is part of a larger movement that has changed how society views unidentified victims. For many years, people without names remained among the most difficult cases for law enforcement agencies. Today, advances in science have given those victims another chance to be recognized. A person who was once unknown can become known. A forgotten history can be recovered. A family can receive answers. A community can remember. But every identification also serves as a reminder of how many questions remain in unresolved cases around the world. Thousands of individuals continue to wait for their identities to be restored. Their cases remain open their stories incomplete, and their families searching for answers. Each breakthrough provides hope. If a person unidentified for decades can finally be named, then other cases may also have solutions waiting somewhere in preserved evidence, forgotten records, or scientific advances that have not yet been applied. The story of Arms, Henry Lottie, therefore represents both an ending and a beginning. It marks the end of anonymity, but it also begins a renewed search for understanding. A name has been recovered. A life has been acknowledged. A historical record has been corrected. The mystery surrounding his identity is no longer unanswered. Yet the importance of a case reaches beyond one individual. It represents a promise that time does not remove the value of a human life. A person should not disappear twice. Not once from the world, and again from memory. Through persistence, science, and the determination of investigators, Arms Henry Lottie was finally recognized. After 54 years, the unknown victim had become a person again. And that transformation remains one of the most powerful achievements in modern cold case investigation, bringing someone back from silence and returning their place in history. For investigators who work with cold cases, there is a moment that carries a unique kind of significance. It is the moment when a person who was once reduced to a file number, a photograph, or a collection of forensic notes becomes human again. A name changes everything. A name creates a connection between the past and the present. A name allows investigators to search for a story instead of only searching for answers. For more than 50 years, the unidentified victim connected to this investigation remained separated from his own history. The evidence existed, but the identity behind that evidence remained hidden. The world knew that someone had died, but it did not know who that person had been. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie changed that. It was a reminder that even the oldest investigations can still move forward when science, determination, and careful research come together. But cold cases are rarely solved through one single discovery. They are solved through persistence, through the willingness to return to questions that have remained unanswered, through the belief that every victim deserves to be remembered. The identification process represented a remarkable achievement, but it also highlighted the difficult reality faced by investigators handling historical cases. Time does not simply pass. It changes everything around an investigation. People age. Communities transform. Records disappear. Memories become uncertain. The world where the original events occurred slowly becomes a different world. For investigators examining a case decades later, the challenge is not only finding information. It is understanding information from another era. Every document must be placed within its original context. Every record must be interpreted carefully. Every detail must be separated from assumptions created by time. Historical investigations require the ability to look backward while thinking forward. The original investigators had worked with the tools available to them. Their efforts reflected the technology, resources, and knowledge of their time. They documented evidence, preserved information, and created a foundation that allowed future investigators to continue. Modern science did not replace that work. It built upon it. This is one of the most important lessons in cold case investigations. A case is rarely solved by one generation alone. It is often a chain of effort stretching across decades. One investigator collects information. Another reviews old files. A scientist applies new technology. A genealogist discovers a connection. A family provides a missing piece of history. Together, these efforts create the possibility of an answer. The story of Arms, Henry Lottie demonstrates how forensic genealogy has changed the landscape of unidentified person investigations. Before these advances, many victims faced the possibility of remaining unknown forever. Their identities depended on traditional methods. A recognizable face, a matching fingerprint, a dental record, a missing person report. If those connections did not exist, the investigation could remain frozen. Genetic genealogy introduced a new path. Instead of asking only whether someone recognized the victim, investigators could search for biological relationships. A distant connection could become the beginning of a family tree. A family tree could become a pathway toward identity. A name could emerge from decades of silence. But this process requires responsibility. Scientific tools provide possibilities, not conclusions. Every identification must be carefully verified. Investigators must ensure that the evidence supports the result. Because behind every name is a family. Behind every identification is a human story. Accuracy is not simply a professional requirement. It is a moral responsibility. The restoration of arms, Henry Lottie's identity, represents more than solving an investigative problem. It represents recognition. Recognition that his life mattered. Recognition that his disappearance mattered. Recognition that the unanswered questions surrounding him were worth pursuing. For families of unidentified victims, recognition can be deeply meaningful. Many families live for years without certainty. They may preserve photographs. They may keep personal belongings. They may tell stories about someone who never came home. But without answers, those memories exist alongside a painful uncertainty. The identification of a missing loved one changes the way a family understands the past. It provides a place to direct grief. It provides a confirmed history. It allows future generations to know what happened. Even when the truth is difficult, it is still a truth. And truth has value. The case also reflects the importance of preserving unidentified person investigations. Across the country, law enforcement agencies maintain files involving victims whose identities remain unknown. Some cases are decades old. Some are even older. Each represents a person waiting to be recognized. Advances in science continue to create new opportunities. Technology that once seemed impossible becomes routine. Methods that once belonged only to research laboratories become available to investigators. Every successful identification creates hope for the remaining cases. The discovery of one person's identity shows that other victims may also have answers waiting. A forgotten file may still contain valuable information. A preserved sample may still hold a genetic connection. A historical record may still reveal a missing link. The search continues because every victim deserves the opportunity to be known. For Arms Henry Lottie, that opportunity finally arrived. After 54 years, his name returned. The unidentified label that had followed the case for decades was replaced with something far more important. A person, a history, a legacy. But the importance of the identification also lies in what it represents for the future. It demonstrates that cold cases are not defined only by how long they remain unsolved. They are defined by the possibility that answers still exist. The passage of time can make investigations more difficult, but it does not remove the responsibility to continue searching. Every generation inherits unanswered questions from the one before. Every generation also receives new tools to solve them. That connection between past and present is what allows cold cases to move forward. A detective decades ago may have preserved a piece of evidence without knowing how valuable it would become. A scientist today may discover information hidden inside that same evidence. A family may finally receive an answer because someone refused to forget. This is the foundation of modern cold case work. Remember. Re-examine. Reconnect. Search again. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie stands as a powerful example of that mission. A man who was once unknown now has a name. A family history that was separated from the investigation has been restored. A forgotten chapter has been returned to the record. But the story also carries a reminder. Finding a victim is not the same as finding justice. Identification answers who someone was. It does not automatically answer every question surrounding what happened. That search requires another kind of investigation. One built on evidence, patience, and time. The name has been found. The memory has been restored. And the pursuit of truth continues. The most difficult moments in a cold case investigation often come after the breakthrough. The world sees the announcement. The headlines recognize the discovery. A name that was missing for decades is finally revealed. But behind that moment of success is the reality that every answer creates new questions. For Arms Henry Lottie, the identification solved the mystery that had surrounded his identity for more than half a century. The unknown victim finally had a name. A person who had existed only through evidence and records could once again be connected to a human story. But the search for complete understanding remained. Because in every homicide investigation, identity is only the beginning. Investigators must still seek the truth of what happened. They must examine the circumstances surrounding the death. They must determine what can be proven through evidence. They must separate what is known from what remains uncertain. This distinction is one of the most important principles in responsible criminal investigation. A victim's story deserves accuracy, not assumptions, not rumors, not theories presented as facts. Only evidence can reveal the truth. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie illustrates the remarkable progress of forensic science, but it also shows the limitations created by time. When decades pass between a crime and a breakthrough, investigators inherit a difficult challenge. They are no longer investigating only an event. They are investigating history. The passage of time changes the landscape around a case. Places look different. Records may be incomplete. People who may have had information may no longer be available. Memories that once seemed clear may have changed over many years. Every cold case investigator must confront this reality. The past cannot be recreated. It can only be reconstructed. And reconstruction requires patience. It requires examining every surviving piece of information and understanding its importance. A photograph, a document, a laboratory report, a family record, an old interview. Each item represents a small piece of a much larger picture. In older investigations, many details were collected without knowing how valuable they might become in the future. Advances in science have changed that perspective. Evidence that once seemed limited can now reveal information that earlier investigators could never access. This is why preservation is so important. Every carefully stored piece of evidence represents a possibility. A possibility that one day technology will advance enough to reveal what was previously hidden. The identification of Lottie became possible because the investigation survived long enough for that possibility to become reality. It also highlights the changing relationship between law enforcement and families of missing people. For many families, identification is not simply a forensic achievement. It is an emotional turning point. For years, families may carry uncertainty that affects multiple generations. Children grow older without answers. Relatives pass away without knowing the truth. Family histories remain incomplete. A missing person becomes a question repeated year after year. The confirmation of identity changes that. It provides certainty where uncertainty once existed. It allows families to remember their loved one with a complete story. It allows a name that had been separated from history to return. This human impact is one of the strongest reasons investigators continue working on unidentified person cases. The purpose is not only solving mysteries. The purpose is recognizing lives. Every unidentified victim represents someone who once belonged somewhere. Someone who had connections. Someone whose existence mattered. The identification of Arms Henry Lottie serves as a reminder that no victim should remain invisible forever. Modern forensic methods have created opportunities that earlier investigators could not imagine. But technology is only one part of the process. The most important element remains determination. Cold cases require people willing to return to difficult questions. People willing to review old information. People willing to search through thousands of pages for one overlooked detail. People willing to continue even when answers seem distant. This commitment defines the work of cold case investigators. They understand that time changes an investigation, but it does not eliminate the need for justice. A case that is decades old is still a case. A victim from another era is still a victim. The importance of the truth does not decrease with time. If anything, the passage of years makes the search even more meaningful. Because every year represents another year that a victim's story remained incomplete. Another year that a family waited. Another year that unanswered questions remained. The identification of Lottie ended one part of that uncertainty. It restored a connection that had been lost. But it also became part of a larger conversation about how society remembers victims whose names were once unknown. Across the United States and around the world, unidentified remains continue to represent unfinished stories. Some victims have remained unnamed for decades. Some have waited generations for recognition. Each identification demonstrates what is possible when science and determination come together. Each identification sends the same message. A person should never become only a case number. A person should never be reduced to the circumstances of their death. A person's life deserves to be remembered. For Arms Henry Lottie, that remembrance came after a long silence. The name that once existed only within family history and forgotten records became part of an official investigation. The unknown victim became known. The missing identity was recovered, and a story that had been interrupted was allowed to continue. But cold cases rarely end with a single moment. They continue through questions, through research, through the search for information that may still exist somewhere. The identification of a victim can create new investigative possibilities. It can reveal connections that were impossible to discover before. It can provide investigators with a clearer understanding of the person they are seeking answers for. A name provides direction. A history provides context. A connection provides opportunity. That is why identification is considered one of the most important breakthroughs in any unidentified homicide investigation. It transforms uncertainty into possibility. It gives investigators something they did not have before. A starting point. For more than 50 years, Arms Henry Lottie's case existed without that starting point. Now it has one. A name. A history. A place within the world. The mystery of identity has been solved. The importance of that achievement cannot be overstated. Because behind every cold case is a human being waiting to be remembered. And sometimes, after decades of silence, the first step toward justice begins with the simplest thing of all: knowing who someone was. For more than 5 decades, the story of Arms Henry Lottie existed in the space between memory and mystery. A victim was discovered. An investigation began. Evidence was collected. Questions were raised. But the most important answer remained missing: a name. Without a name, the story could not move forward. Without a name, investigators could not fully understand the person behind the case file. Without a name, a family history remained separated from the investigation. Then, after 54 years, modern science finally restored what time had taken away. Al-Mohilati. A name that had been hidden for generations was returned to the official record. A person who had been known only through forensic descriptions became connected once again to the world. This achievement represented far more than the conclusion of an identification process. It represented the power of persistence, the evolution of forensic science, and the belief that forgotten victims still deserve answers. Because the passage of time does not erase the importance of a life. It does not erase the impact of a disappearance. And it does not erase the responsibility to continue searching for the truth. The identification of Lottie stands as part of a larger transformation in criminal investigations. Across the world, cases once considered impossible are being revisited through new technology and new methods. DNA analysis has changed what investigators can discover. Genetic genealogy has created connections that could not have existed before. Digital archives have preserved information that might otherwise have disappeared. Scientific progress has opened doors that previous generations never had the opportunity to enter. But technology alone is not what solves these cases. Behind every breakthrough are people, investigators who continue searching, scientists who analyze evidence, researchers who examine history, families who provide information and keep memories alive. Every identification is the result of many efforts connected across time. The story of Arms Henry Lottie is a reminder that cold case investigations are not simply about old crimes. They are about unfinished human stories. A person who disappears leaves behind questions. Questions for families. Questions for communities. Questions for investigators. Those questions can remain unanswered for years, sometimes for generations. But every answer matters. Because every victim has a story that existed before the investigation began. A person's life is not defined only by the circumstances of their death. It is defined by everything that came before. The places they lived, the people they knew, the experiences they carried, the memories they left behind. Identification restores those connections. It reminds the world that the victim was never just evidence. The victim was a person. For families, that recognition can carry enormous meaning. The uncertainty of not knowing can become its own form of suffering. A family may wonder for decades. They may search through old records. They may ask whether their loved one is still somewhere waiting to be found. They may hold on to photographs and memories without ever knowing the full story. When identification finally occurs, the pain does not disappear. But uncertainty is replaced by truth. A chapter that remained open for decades can finally be completed. A name can be spoken again. A life can be remembered. The case of Arms Henry Lottie also demonstrates the importance of continuing to investigate unresolved mysteries responsibly. The discovery of identity is a major breakthrough, but it is not the same as answering every question surrounding a death. A responsible investigation must continue to rely on evidence. It must recognize what is known and what remains unknown. It must avoid filling gaps with speculation. Because the search for justice requires truth. Not assumptions. Not theories without proof. Not stories created to explain what evidence cannot confirm. The integrity of an investigation depends on patience. And patience has always been at the heart of cold case work. Investigators understand that some answers may take years. Some may take decades. But every case solved proves that time does not always win. A preserved piece of evidence can become valuable years later. A scientific breakthrough can change an investigation overnight. A forgotten record can suddenly become important. A family connection can restore an identity lost for generations. The impossible can become possible. The story of Arms Henry Lottie carries that message. A victim who remained unidentified for 54 years was finally recognized. A mystery that survived changing generations finally produced one of its most important answers. The unknown man became a named individual. The forgotten victim became remembered. The silence was broken. Yet the case also leaves behind a powerful reminder. For every victim who receives an identity, there are others still waiting. Across the world, unidentified people remain connected only to case numbers and evidence files. Their families may still be searching. Their stories may still be incomplete. But every breakthrough provides hope. Every identification proves that answers can survive. Every solved case demonstrates that forgotten does not mean lost forever. The story of Arms Henry Lottie is therefore not only about the past. It is also about the future. It is about the continuing effort to use science, dedication, and compassion to restore names to those who have been waiting. Because justice begins with recognition. Before a mystery can be solved, someone must first be seen. Before a story can be told, someone must first be known. And after 54 years, Arms Henry Lottie was finally known again. His name returned. His history restored. His place in the world remembered. The case remains a powerful example of what happens when determination meets technology. When investigators refuse to forget. When science reaches beyond the limits of time. When a person lost to history is finally brought back into the light. For decades, he was an unidentified victim. Now he is remembered by name. Al-Mawhilati. A name that waited more than half a century to be found. A name that proves even the oldest mysteries can still hold answers. And a reminder that behind every cold case is not just evidence. There is a person. There is a life. And there is a story that deserves to be told.